It's so common for us to be empathetic and have that mean that as soon as somebody shares their tears or their worries, we take it on. We feel responsible, or we find ourselves lying awake at night worrying about this person's situation when we have no control over it. If you're a leader who cares about your team and you really want your people to feel comfortable coming to you with their worries or their concerns or their ideas, but you also want to protect yourself so that you don't absorb their emotions, this episode is for you. I'm going to show you one of my favorite exercises that will help you stay grounded and connected to yourself so you can provide support without removing responsibility. Welcome to Drama-Free Teams, the show for leaders who care deeply and want their teams to thrive without the drama. I'm your host, Dr. Annie Campanile. Let's shift how you lead so you can stop dreading conflict and start driving results. Have you ever noticed how when one person on a team is upset, they're angry about a change, or they feel like someone's hurt their feelings, as soon as they tell that story, people who care about them take on those emotions, and then everybody's upset. Everybody in the night shift is upset with the day shift, or everybody in the day shift is upset with the night shift. Sometimes this happens with positive emotions too, but it often doesn't last. And I think that's because our survival brains are always watching out for reasons to be on edge. So if one person comes into work angry, or they're ending their shift and they complain about a coworker, other people take that on. And you as the leader need to be able to stay grounded, but you find that when a team member comes to you and they share their emotions with you, whether you want to or not, you feel their emotions and you take them in. You find yourself being what I call a sponge. This is really common for people who are empathetic and for people who might have gone through trauma. You might have been wired to think of support as responsibility, or to think about empathy as responsibility. Like, you can't just be with somebody because you've got these things, which I think is kind of cool. We have these things in our brains called mirror neurons. Now, do you need to know that? No, but I think it's fun to know what's going on in my brain. So these things called mirror neurons, they give us the superpower, really, of feeling what another person is feeling. But the tricky part of this is that another part of our brain does not know the difference between what we are observing and what we're feeling and what somebody else is feeling. If we feel it in our bodies, our brain thinks, oh, this is happening to me. So that's why if you watch a tearjerker movie or even a commercial, you can find yourself getting tearful. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a really cool kind of superpower to help us to relate to one another. But where it becomes a trap is when you're a leader and you're wanting to provide support, to be that listening ear. You want to be the person that other people talk about as being a sort of a safe haven, being a great listener. And yet you notice yourself feeling more and more exhausted or overwhelmed or angry. If your folks are angry and they come and vent it to you, you're going to start to feel angry as well. So how do you protect yourself from that? Some people decide that they need to just stick to the facts at work. They need to not have that emotional connection with their people. That's a valid option. But if you're an empathetic person, if you're a person who really wants your team to be authentic around you, it's not a sustainable strategy to act as though you don't have emotions. Another option that a lot of leaders I talk with do is they just believe that that's part of leadership. Leadership equals self-sacrifice. That doesn't feel good either. And it's not true. You don't have to sacrifice yourself every time you go into work in order to be a leader. A few years ago, I was working as an executive coach for a health system in the Midwest of the United States. And one day I was coaching a leader who was on the verge of quitting. She actually came to me to decide, should she keep going as a leader, or was it a role that was just not for her? Let's call her Stephanie. On this particular day, Stephanie told me that even though it had always been her dream to be a leader, now that she'd been doing it for several years, she felt like she was failing. And I asked her to explain why, because I knew that she actually had a reputation as a good, effective leader. She told me that she thought she was failing because she had two employees who just did not get along with each other. And every time one of them came to her to complain about the other one, she found herself internally siding with that person. She would feel their anger or feel their sadness and notice herself judging the other person. But then as soon as she talked to that other person, the same thing happened and they would cry or they would get angry and she would feel their emotions. And then she just didn't know what to do because she could see both of their points, but she couldn't resolve their conflict. So to help her with the practical, how do you help people resolve conflict? I shared with her the empowered feedback method that I described in episode 12. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for you. But even more than her technical skill at resolving conflict, what I thought was more important in that moment was her skill at managing her emotions. I knew that even if she developed excellent skills at resolving conflict, if she did not develop a skill of protecting her energy while listening to other people vent, I knew she wouldn't stay in leadership for very long. So I shared with her my favorite exercise that I personally have used for more than 20 years as I've been providing coaching to people who sometimes share very traumatic stories with me. I call it be a bowl, BOWL, not a sponge. So this relies on our ability to use our imagination. And if you feel like you're a person who doesn't have a very creative mind, I want to just reassure you that you're probably using your imagination much more often than you think. Because everything you tell yourself about what's happening, what's going to happen, how it's going to turn out, that's actually using your imagination. So be a bowl, not a sponge. Here's how it works. First, you imagine that you're holding your favorite bowl. So, okay, you're not technically being a bowl, but just go with me on this. All right, so imagine you're holding your favorite bowl. Mine happens to be a pale yellow milk glass mixing bowl from, I think, probably the 1930s. I bought it at an antique store years and years and years ago. And I don't know why. I just love this bowl. I love the pale yellow color. I love milk glass in general. I like thinking about the women who might have used it to bake for their families. It doesn't really matter what your bowl is. It just needs to be something that you like to think about. It'll make it much easier when you're in that stressful moment and you want to do this exercise. I also recommend that you imagine a bowl that's made of glass because glass does not absorb anything that's poured into it. Play with this exercise and see what works for you, but those are my tips. A bowl that's glass and a bowl that you enjoy thinking about. Then you imagine it in your lap and very, very large. So much larger than it actually is. That will allow your body to stay open. Whether you're meeting with somebody virtually or in person, this is really helpful because it will help your nervous system stay calm. Then, as the person is sharing their emotions with you, they're telling you their story, they're complaining about their coworker, they're sharing a personal tragedy, whatever it is, all of those words and all of those emotions, imagine they are being held by the bowl. They're being poured into the bowl, not into you. You will find that if you do this exercise, your body will stay calmer, your nervous system will stay calmer. The other person will feel like you were so present with them. They will feel heard. And you, at the end of the conversation, you can walk away without all of that energy being stuck to you. So here's how you do that. After the conversation is complete, you imagine pouring the contents of the bowl into a beautiful setting. Now, I say a beautiful setting because when I first came up with this exercise, I was kind of feeling like, I want to get this energy out. So I imagined I just sort of chucked it into the street. And my mind would not let go of it. I realized, wow, there's a part of my mind that needs every step of this process to be kind or beautiful. So now I have this very vivid image in my mind. I pour the contents of my bowl into a mountain stream. I imagine sunlight coming through the pine trees and the water in the stream being crystal clear with deer drinking the water and flowers growing. Depending on how attached I feel to the other person's emotional well-being, I add more and more and more detail to that image because I find it helps me to let go, to actually imagine the contents of the bowl, which again are the other person's emotions, worries, concerns. All of that is being poured into that stream and carried downstream to whoever is going to be on that person's path next. It reminds me that I am not that person's only resource. I'm their leader, and I want to be there to hear them and to provide support, but I'm not responsible for them. I choose to believe that they are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and that somebody else is going to come across their path to provide support downstream. So that's the exercise that you can play with and try. Be a bowl, not a sponge. I'll put the full description in the show notes in case you want to have that to refer to. I've been teaching this exercise to nurses and healthcare leaders for about 15 years, and it is really fun to hear the stories when people come back and tell me, hey, it works. I don't feel as exhausted. I'm sleeping through the night. I'm enjoying leadership again. Does this mean that you'll never feel stressed if your employees are stressed? No, because again, you've got those mirror neurons and you also have your own perspectives and opinions about what's happening in your organization. It's natural to have the ups and downs of emotion. So remember, being empathetic does not mean taking on the other person's emotions and carrying the burden of their suffering. You can help people feel heard without you being drained. And when you do this, you're modeling healthy boundaries for your team. It's a win, 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 win. Everybody wins because the person who needs support receives it, and the person giving support doesn't suffer in the process. So if you've been feeling burned out or overwhelmed in your leadership role, and you want to be able to provide support to people, but not feel so drained and exhausted, try this exercise of be a bowl, not a sponge, and let me know how it went. There's a link in today's show notes where you can send me a message or send me a DM on Instagram at Dr. Annie Campanile. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Drama-Free Teams. If this episode sparked a little bit of hope for you, please scroll down, click those 5 stars, and share it with a friend. Next time, we'll tackle that anxious voice that says, it's not enough, I have to do more. The one that shows up about 2.5 seconds after you've achieved something that you've worked hard for. You'll learn how to reclaim your sense of satisfaction so that you can lead from fullness, not fear. Until then, I'm Dr. Annie Campanile, reminding you that thriving in leadership is possible, and you don't have to do it alone. See you next time.